Williams to inbound. Simpson with it for the lead. Oh! 1.7. Long shot. Good as it goes. Colorado wins. The Buffaloes have won.
All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Basketball in the Mountains. I am your host, Tyler King. This is episode 47, and we're back talking college hoops today ahead of a big weekend, both on Friday and Saturday. A lot of good games here across the Mountain time zone, which we'll be previewing almost all of them. In the second half of the show, we'll be talking a little bit about some of what I've seen from BYU, Arizona so far, the headliners here in the Mountain time zone, at least in terms of the AP poll rankings and all that kind of stuff. But we've got a great guest on the show today as well, a little bit of a two-parter episode, and we're going to be previewing one of these big games this week. Obviously, with the intro video, you can tell we're back talking Colorado Buffaloes, and to do so, we've got assistant coach Nate Tomlinson from the Buffs on the show today. Coach, how you doing?
Doing well, man. After that intro, my hairs are standing up on my arms. I'm fired up. 1:30 on a Wednesday, but yeah, I'm good. 2-0. Not where we quite want to be as far as on the court product, but at the end of the day, we're 2 wins, 0 losses, and then you can't ask for a better position to be.
Yeah, obviously, yeah, like you mentioned, 2-0 last week in the first week, beating a pair of pretty good Big Sky teams, Montana State, Eastern Washington, both those games coming down to the wire. Obviously, this is a pretty new look group, not just for you, but for the entire coaching staff, trying to get a lot of the younger guys assimilated in and trying to figure out rotations and all that kind of stuff. But overall, did you kind of like the resolve you saw from the guys and late in the second half of these games, then in overtime against Eastern Washington as well?
Definitely. Those games, I mean, you just look across college basketball the first week or so of the season, and there's a lot of, upsets, whatever you want to call it. But for our young group and our new group, not a whole lot of returners. In those close games, especially at home, when teams like that hang around, it can get a little difficult. But they did what they needed to do to get the win on the night. And that's a positive, step, but we know that we're nowhere near where we need to be, especially on the defensive end of the floor. And, the teams that are going to come into the building are only going to continue to get better. So do we.
Yeah, obviously, I know that's something. Even though the offense has been really good, Coach Boyle is always going to be harping on the defensive end and some of the breakdowns you guys have had. Just how have you guys approached that this week in practice? Knowing we're going to talk a little bit about the Providence game in a little bit here. Just kind of how have you approached that, knowing there's a little bit of different caliber opponent coming to town this Friday night?
Yeah, it shouldn't matter who's coming to town. That's the honest truth. Is our standard no matter who we're playing against. And college basketball, the parity is kind of evening out. The transfer portal works both ways. So there's some really, really good players on Montana State, on Eastern Washington that have transferred down, from the ACC, from the Big Ten. And all those guys, especially early in the season, they play in arenas like ours. They go play in Big 12 gyms, Big 10 gyms. So they're not afraid. Especially the older teams, they're used to it. And you're just gonna find yourselves in close games early in the season, because a lot of new pieces on each team, and got to figure it out as it goes.
Couple individual performances I wanted to spotlight and ask you about from these first couple games. Obviously, in the opener with Isaiah Johnson, the freshman, really kind of taking college basketball world by storm with what he did in the second half of that game. I know you've gotten to work with him pretty closely since the start of the summer, since you arrived back on campus, rejoining the staff, and obviously him as a freshman coming in. How impressed have you been by what he's been able to show just since he got on campus, since you started being around him leading up to the Australia trips, all those practices, and then kind of how quickly he was ready to go from game one for this group?
Yeah, he was a guy that just like increasingly got better, like really, really quickly. He came in late after graduating in California a little bit late in the summer. So um, he comes in about a buck 50 dripping wet, and he's not the most intimidating guy to look at.
Certainly,
Um,
for sure, yeah.
what was that?
Certainly got a baby face on him for sure.
Yeah, I mean, he's got the baby face, and but when he gets on the court, he's a killer, and we quickly realized that. And then he showed us, in live action in Australia. He's probably his best game of the trip was against the national team and some really, really high quality players. So we knew pretty quickly that we had a dude on our hands. And obviously he's a freshman. He needs to get better just like everybody else. But we knew that he's not afraid of the moment. And I think we've seen that the first two games of the year.
And in the second game against Eastern Washington, Sebastian Ranchik really had a great game, getting a free throw line a lot, just kind of showcasing all of the stuff that he really tried to work on throughout the summer. Obviously, you weren't around him last year with the team, but just kind of what have you been impressed with the most since you got here and kind of seeing Sebi and just kind of how he's conducted himself as kind of taking a bigger leap and maybe taking on a bigger role offensively and just trying to be the guy for this team when he's out there on the court?
Yeah, I think this team. I don't think there's going to be one guy. Sebi is a way that is a player that can impact the game in a lot of ways. And we talked about over the summer, him being a better rebounder, a better defender, and really trying to impose himself on that end of the floor. He was in a great rhythm. He was our second leading rebounder across all of the summer um, and the fall practices. And then he had a little setback with the ankle, missed almost 3 weeks, and only really started practicing a couple days before that Montana State game. So he was a little rusty. I think we saw he had a really good couple days of preparation going into Eastern Washington, and I think we saw the results of who he can be. Now it's, can he be that type of guy every night for us? And that's kind of going to depend on will depend on how he goes on, across, like I said, impacting the game. Obviously, he's going to score. He's going to get to the free throw line, but defending, rebounding, being versatile defender, being able to guard, bigs and switch onto guards gives us a lot of flexibility. So, we're going to lean on him a lot.
Now, obviously, I mentioned at the top of the show that one of the big games this weekend across college basketball is your team's game against Providence, 7 p.m. At the Event Center on ESPN Plus. I know, obviously, it's a big game for you as you spent the last couple of years with Coach Kim English at Providence, and now coming back to the Buffs. Just kind of what is it going to be like for you this Friday night, seeing your old squad, some guys you worked with, all that kind of stuff?
I've tried to block it out for the last couple of months. Obviously, it's real now. It's here. Um, Nothing but respect for that whole school program, every player, or the staff. Some of my best friends. Um, it's going to be a hell of a game. I know they're going to come in here and really try to impose themselves. They're kind of struggling like we are a little bit on the defensive end, and two programs that pride themselves on that end of the floor. So whoever can figure it out first is probably going to have more success on Friday night. But yeah, can't speak highly enough of that whole program, of Kim, one of my best friends, but just not this week.
I was going to ask. I mean, obviously, Kim gave you a big responsibility when he brought you with him to Providence a couple years ago. Kind of, I remember we talked about this a little bit over the summer when you first got back to Boulder. But how much did you feel like you grew as a coach during your time at Providence? Just kind of being thrown into the fire in a bigger role, and kind of how much when you look back on that time, like, man, I really didn't know a lot maybe at the beginning, but now you kind of feel a lot more prepared for what Coach Boyle's asking you to do on a day-to-day basis?
Yeah, honestly, it was our first stop at George Mason together. I think I would have been 31, 32. Him similar age, and we're just kind of thrown into it. And you think you know what you're doing, and then you quickly realize you're not so sure, but you figure it out on the fly. And those 2 years, our first 2 years at George Mason were probably to me, our most special ones, kind of building our program and ultimately having a pretty good year our second year, and then being fortunate enough to get the Providence job. But yeah, like I said, he's one of my best friends. I think we're very similar in some ways in our philosophies of the game, and yeah, talk to him pretty much every day except for the last week or so. So it'll be a competitive game on Friday, and I think it's a great game for both programs. Early in the year, find out where you're at. This is a real tough place to play, and then next year we'll go to Providence, which is also a tough place to play. So it's a great game. Remove all the emotions and all that sort of stuff. It's a great game for both programs.
I was going to ask who kind of sticks out to you on the Providence side so far. I know they've got a bunch of guys in double figures. They're also trying to maybe figure out some newcomers and rotations and all that kind of stuff. Like, what sticks out to you about this group when you watch them play on film?
Yeah, well, they're averaging 100 points a game,
Yeah.
across the 3 games. So, they can really, really score the ball. The transfers that they've brought in have scored the ball across their whole career. So it's not like these 3 games are a fluke. That's what they do. They're very talented, very, very talented offensive team that, Vox, Edwards, Sellers, those 3 right there are averaging almost 60 points a game for them. So, we're going to have to sit down and guard, which we haven't been able to do for the first 2 games. So, like I said, whoever can figure it out on the defensive end, Friday night's gonna go a long way to winning the game.
Last thing I want to ask, because you mentioned this as well, just kind of these tests that you get throughout non-conference play. This is the first one. Then when you guys go to Palm Desert, you get a couple there, whether it's both San Francisco and then either Nevada, Washington the second day. You got CSU on the road in December, and then Stanford, kind of a neutral site game. All these little tests throughout non-conference play will teach you a lot about the team you have. What do you think you'll learn this week? You mentioned obviously wanting to show improvements on the defensive end against a really good offensive team. And how much can this group learn from this game, regardless of what the result is going to be? I know obviously you guys are trying to win it and everything, but just kind of how much of a learning point can this game be for a group like this that is still trying to figure out how to play together a little bit?
Yeah, it needs to look right. When we go back and we watch the film, it needs to look right. And what I mean by that is it needs to be up to Colorado basketball standard. And like I said earlier, it doesn't matter who's on the floor, what night, where we're playing, doesn't matter. We have to play how we want to play to, give us some success to win games. And it's both ends of the floor right now. The offense is, there's some flow to it. We're having some success, but one sunny day doesn't mean it's summer. You got to do that every game and keep going. And defensively, we got to find our identity, and we don't have that yet. It's something that this program's built on and has been for a number of years. So, yeah, Friday is going to be a great test, and so is Monday, and all these teams as they come in. And then we go to our MTE and go on the road to Colorado State, like you said. But these games early in the year, to me, that's why you come to Colorado. We're going to put ourselves in these types of games for us as a program to show where we're at on the national stage, but then obviously for our individual players to play in these big time environments.
All right, Nate, that's all I got for you. I appreciate you taking the time out of your busy schedule, getting ready for an emotional game for you Friday. But I appreciate you taking the time, like I said, and thanks for coming on.
No worries. Thanks, Tyler.
All right, hello everyone. Welcome back to the show. Thanks again to Colorado assistant coach Nate Tomlinson for joining us in the first half to give a preview of this Friday night's game for the Buffs against Providence. Obviously, a team he knows really well, having spent the last couple of years there as an assistant coach under head coach Kim English. Should be a really fun non-conference matchup that we talked our way through. Now I'm going to wrap up the show today by previewing some of the other big college games across the Mountain Time Zone on the weekend. I have to start on Friday night. A pair of big games. The biggest one, obviously, is Arizona, who is up to number 5 in the country now after an impressive 3-0 start, including that win over Florida to open the season. They are at number 13 UCLA at the Intuit Dome, so that'll be a fun game at the Intuit Dome, home of the Clippers. UCLA ranked number 15th in the country, also unbeaten, also looking pretty good under Mick Cronin. So that should be, old school Pac-10 game that we're going to get now as a non-conference game. Still feels pretty weird to say that, but should be a really fun matchup on Friday night in LA. I think that's on 8 o'clock in the Mountain Time Zone on Peacock. Obviously, Koa Pete, the star freshman for Arizona, has been the biggest storyline so far. Really the freshman class as a whole for Arizona. A very unique roster that was put together down there by the Wildcats. With obviously losing a lot of guys, losing Caleb Love he graduated. You lose a guy like Henry Vasar to the portal. He's at North Carolina now. A bunch of other guys. The really only guy that they brought back, a couple guys that brought back. Jaden Bradley played a bunch last year. Tobe Awaka, same thing. He's a former Tennessee transfer who played a good amount off the bench last year for Arizona. And then you get Mateusz Krivas back, the big man down there. He obviously missed all of last season with an injury. So those are the 3 main guys they have back. But then you're bringing in a bunch of freshmen like Koa Pete, Braden Burries, the 2 5-stars that already headlined it, and obviously it's worked out really well so far with Arizona going 3-0. Obviously, hasn't been the same level of competition since that Florida game, but when you beat the defending national champions, and even though they lost a bunch of guys, they still had a bunch of guys back too. That front court is basically all the same. Even though there's no Walter Clayton Jr., Florida loaded up in the transfer portal, getting a guy like Xavier Lee from Princeton. They got Boogie Flan from Arkansas, all that kind of stuff. This is not a Florida team, star for talent. So impressive win by Arizona to open the season a little over a week ago at this point. But now they've got another test this Friday night, like I said, at UCLA. Should be a great crowd, probably a mixed crowd if we're being honest, even though it is a lot closer to really close to UCLA's campus in Inglewood. I think Arizona fans will show up. They always do, especially out there in Los Angeles. There's a lot of Arizona grads in LA, so should be a good crowd on Friday night for that game. I'm looking forward to seeing what Koa Pete can do, because obviously he's played really well so far to start the season, but none better than that Florida game when he had 30 points, 7 rebounds. I think he had 5 assists and a block too. Was doing it kind of. He's obviously a guy that's not really shooting. He's not shooting. Hasn't taken a 3 yet. So he's a guy that's playing from inside the arc right now. But he's can score in a variety of different ways. Like he's kind of like an old school power forward so far. And I'm probably gonna have one of my friends on the show that is really big in the drafts, big in the NBA draft, to break down both Koa Pete's game and another guy, AJ DeBanso, we're going to talk about in a little bit too, to break down their games, because they're looking like they're going to be both top 5, top 10 picks at the minimum next year. So we'll break down both those guys more in depth at some point in the next couple weeks. But just my take from watching Pete, he's doing a great job in the short roll as a screener. Great job rolling to the rim as a screener as well, catching some lobs in that game. Obviously, hitting some tough mid-range jumpers. Like I said, kind of an old school power forward. He's 6'8", 6'9", a really big bruiser, a guy you don't really isn't comfortable to deal with in the post. So I'll be interested to see how he plays again against another top opponent. He's played less than 30 minutes in each of the last 2 games. Kind of comfortable victories against Utah Tech and Northern Arizona. So just wanted to spotlight that game as well. And then also on Friday night, you've got Arizona State, who's 2-0. Obviously not great competition, beating Southern Utah and Utah Tech in their first 2 games. But they've got number 19 Gonzaga coming to Tempe for a pretty interesting game. Gonzaga, I think, looks awesome. That shouldn't be much of a surprise given how experienced their roster is. Guys like Graham Ike, who I know pretty well, being an Aurora guy here from Colorado. In his final year, he's been off to an awesome start, and they've also got Tyon Grant Foster, who got the eligibility for this year. So a really veteran Gonzaga team that might be better than some people expected going into the year. They look like a team, at least early on. It's tough to. It's tough to kind of judge these things that early, but they boat raced Oklahoma, beat the brakes off Creighton too. Those are 2 really, really impressive wins in the fashion that they did it. And now they've got a chance to go get a signature signature-ish road win at Arizona State, even though I think myself and a lot of people had them at or near the bottom of the Big 12 going into this year. I mean, they've had a decent start to the year. You look at a guy like Massamba Diop, the freshman big man they've got there from Senegal. He's averaging 16 points per game in the first 2 games. He's looked really awesome, to be honest. A 7-footer looks like he can do a little bit of everything, even stepping out and hit some threes on the perimeter. So definitely another game to watch late tomorrow night. I think that on Friday night, I think the game tips off, 9:00 on ESPN2. So Pac-12 after dark or whatever, West Coast hoops after dark. It should be a fun matchup between the Sun Devils and the Zags tomorrow night. But then on moving over to Saturday, another big game in the Big 12. And I alluded to it earlier. It is number 7 BYU and number 3 UConn in Boston at TD Garden, home of the Celtics. A homecoming for AJ DeBansa, who is from the Massachusetts, Boston area. Obviously spent a lot of his high school career in the Utah area before getting to BYU this year. But another big-time matchup. UConn looks great so far. Haven't really played anybody all that difficult, but I think, you can look at the roster that Dan Hurley's put together there, and you can see that this is going to be another UConn team that believes it can contend for a Final Four spot. So I'm really interested to see what BYU looks like. We've talked about it on the season preview episode for the Cougs, that they've got a really intriguing non-conference schedule. It opened in Vegas against Villanova, where they had the 5-point win. Now they've got UConn in at the Garden, like I said, and then they've got Wisconsin. I think that game's at the Delta Center. They've got Miami later, Clemson, a bunch of really intriguing power conference teams, high major programs that they're going to be facing off here before Big 12 play kicks underway, when they're likely going to be one of the 2 or 3 favorites, in the conference. And AJ DeBansa is a big reason why. I think he's looked awesome so far. 18.7 points per game, 7 rebounds, shooting almost 60% from the field. Despite, I think he's only 2 of 7 on threes. He got to the line a decent amount in the Villanova game, even though he missed a bunch of them, but I've been intrigued by what he's looked like so far. I think the Tracy McGrady comps are still going to be coming all season long for him when people start really digging into his tape. But I still don't see that a ton. Like I said, we'll dig into him more in depth as an NBA prospect in the next couple of weeks. But for now, he's doing everything he needs to do for BYU to win, and we'll see how he attacks. Dan Hurley's going to have a good game plan. If you know one thing about Dan Hurley and UConn, they're going to put a good game plan together to go against this BYU loaded BYU team with Rob Wright III. I think looked really good at point guard after coming in from Baylor. Richie Saunders is Richie Saunders. I think he struggled a little bit to shoot the ball in the opener, but he's still one of the top players in the country. Big 12 first team guy. He's averaging 20 points per game so far through 3 games. So they've certainly got a loaded starting lineup there for BYU. That'll be fun to see what they look like against UConn on Friday night. I think that's on 5 p.m. on Fox here in the Mountain Time Zone. Fun game in the Boston area, like I said. So should be likely a heavy UConn crowd. Just obviously they're a lot closer to Boston than BYU is, but I think a lot of BYU fans will be making the trip out there for that game, especially to support AJ DeBansa. A little bit of homecoming for him. Like I said, I mean, he's going to be playing in the NBA arena starting next year, so it's not going to be anything new or special to him, because it's going to be regular for him. But just wanted to hit a couple of these games headed into a big weekend of non-conference hoops. Like I said, I'll be at Providence Buffs on Friday night. That game's at 7 p.m. on ESPN Plus, so stay tuned for that. I'll have coverage after that game at denvergazette.com. So appreciate everybody for tuning in to today's episode. Appreciate Nate Tomlinson once again, the CU assistant coach, back with the program once again, for coming on the show today to take a look at that Providence game and just kind of give his thoughts on the early start for the Buffs 2-0. Like we said, we talked about the wins they've had over Montana State and Eastern Washington, and some of the highlights for the Buffs so far to start their season. So appreciate his time as always, and appreciate yours as well. Make sure to subscribe to the channel wherever you're listening to this, whether it's Apple podcast or Spotify. If you prefer to watch on Spotify or watching on YouTube, subscribe to the channel there. Leave a like on the video, comment either on Spotify or or over on YouTube. Let me know what you guys are excited about over the next couple weeks, who you want to hear from in the Mountain Time Zone, some of these key figures. A little bit of a combined episode today where we have the guest and the preview episode for the weekend, but might have these episodes broken up into two as we go forward here with, probably the set schedule, like I mentioned earlier in the week, talking NBAs on Mondays, hopefully have a guest in the middle of the week, either player, coaching guest in the middle of the week, and then previewing almost always a big college hoops weekend on Fridays. So thanks again, everybody, for watching today's show. And thanks again to Nate Tomlinson for joining us, and everyone enjoy the weekend of basketball.